Thank you once again for staying with us here on NTV Weekend Edition. You're still with me, Sandra Twinoblio and Maureen Nambadira. Now, earlier this week, the news of another school fire left many parents shaken to the core about the safety of their children in boarding schools. And while investigations are still underway into the causes of the fires that have plagued institutions this year and even the years before, there is growing consensus about the need for standards in how schools are built and also maintained. So to help us with this discussion, we are hosting Nelson Mkwaya, who is an electrical engineer, just to pick his thoughts on the current events that are happening within institutions. A very good evening, and thank you so much for joining us, engineer.
Thank you.
Well, what do you make of the most recent school fires that we've had in this country?
First of all, I think it's very unfortunate what's coming out of fires. We have loss of lives, we have loss of property, we have lost sometimes, for example, the fire that happened in Makerere, where we lose documents and so on. It's unfortunate, but it points to a problem that we have and the need for this kind of conversation.
How then would you describe the current state of schools in this country? Would you say that we have standards that we are following before an institution is set up? Because there have been also roughly concerns within the society that usually people just turn makeshift structures to schools, you know. Do you think we have a standard for how we build our schools?
With standards, I can tell you that we are lacking as a nation. I mean, the practice of designing and supervising construction of buildings. And basically, as a nation, I'm certain we have little coverage of the standards that we need to be able to put up secure buildings. And basically, we end up, for example, I can tell you that the best coverage we have in Uganda is contained in what we call the Building Control Regulations of the last edition is 2020. It's only a portion of the regulation that covers fire safety. And yet, as a country, we need extensive documentation, extensive standards around fire, because it's a broad discipline. So, as a country, we are lacking. Now, if you are lacking in that kind of standards, even implementation of safety in the buildings will lack, because the people are supposed to ensure that buildings are secure, have little reference. Yeah.
Who would you say is to blame? I want us to dig deeper into the standards. I mean, you just pointed out a few, but who do you think is to blame? Is it institutions not really following up on the available laws that are put in place or the available standards, or is it just that as a nation the leadership has failed to clearly stipulate the needed standards for institutions?
Well, this we can put it to the institutions and to the country. I mean, to the leadership. On the part of the institutions, they have not been responsible enough, especially with how they've converted certain structures that are meant for a different purpose into the purpose of accommodating students. It's common, you go in schools and you find buildings that were meant for some purpose have been hoarded off, closed off in some spaces, and now they've been converted into accommodation for students. It's also common that you find congestion in these buildings. It's clear to the institution owners, the school owners, that these buildings have a certain capacity. But because of the number of students they're dealing with, they have not managed that number. They've gone on to congest these buildings. Now, on the part of the government and its arms, you know, we have, well, it's several parties here. We have the engineers body, like the Engineers Registration Board. We have associations like Association of Consulting Engineers. We have Uganda National Bureau of Standards. We have the National Building Review Board, which has come into place about 3 years ago. So all these should work together and put in place standards for the country. And I want to comment about standards. We might be at some level of infancy with these standards. But what we are doing, and I want to also talk about how we get good practice and good buildings in place as the players in construction. We have reference, we draw reference to well-established standards. We refer to British standards, which have been in place for a long time and they're continually improved. We also refer to American standards. So with these standards, we have good references. The country has references to develop its own and to make it standard that this is what we refer to as a country. So basically, we have failed in all those areas, and we can address it by accelerating the adoption of these standards and making it the standards of the nation. Yeah.
Just to bring in just briefly the aspect of a limited number of engineers in this country. In the most recent days, we've had complaints coming through, people putting the blame on engineers as well. Do you think that has a role to play in the unfolding events that we are seeing?
I believe so. First of all, I think for the viewers, it's important to know the role of the different players in construction. Just like I mentioned the building control regulations, they mention the composition of a team for putting up a building. Now, beyond this regulation, it's important that you have the right team. You should have, if you're going to put up a building, you should have an architect. The architect is going to design for his spaces, taking into mind the purpose of the structure. If it's a dormitory, they will make sure that it has the right design to accommodate, pupils for dwelling, and also to allow for things like easy exit in case of fire. Now you have the engineers who support the architects to make sure that there are systems in place that are going to make sure that in case, first of all, fires are prevented, but in case of fires, there's fighting of the fires and there's alerting of the occupants. Now when you go to the numbers of the engineers, I would agree that our numbers are still small for the amount
of... About 1,500? Yeah,
for the amount of construction that's going on. Well, this also goes to the Engineers Registration Board. And they've made effort in the previous years to make it, to facilitate preparation of engineers and registering them. The numbers are small for the amount of construction that's going on in the country. That would be on the part of the engineers and the professionals, but especially for the engineers.
Well, if you are to just copy from some developed countries, we see that schools almost look alike, due to meeting the same established standards. I mean, is this possible in a way in our country? Is it something that we should be looking at, to achieve?
Benchmarking is good. And like I've said, if we do not have certain standards in the country, we are not going to observe the best practices.
Sure.
Our buildings, many of these buildings in schools are not fit for purpose. And fit for purpose, a building will have to be designed for the purpose of accommodation of students. So indeed, moving to the other countries where standards have been well developed for decades and for centuries for some countries, the buildings are fit for purpose and you can see it. Our buildings, many of them are not fit for purpose. Yeah.
Would you say that parents, for example, also have a role in what is happening? Do they get to decide, is there something like of a bare minimum that can guide parents when choosing, which institutions to take their children to? How do you determine that this institution is properly built to cater for my child's interests? Is there a way one can do that for a lay person that is watching us tonight?
I think the role of parents, number one, is to access dormitories. They should access dormitories and make assessment.
Yes.
You see, I don't know, it's important to give a picture of what a secure space is. First of all, a secure space should be a space that there's ease of exit. And some institutions carry out emergency exit drills, fire drills. So there should be, even a layperson should be able to tell that in case of a fire, in case of a stampede, how easy is it to exit this building or this dormitory? How many people are we looking at? Some dormitories, indeed, it's visible, they are congested.
True.
And the exits are small, and the passages are blocked. So parents should ask themselves the number of pupils that or students that are in this dormitory in case of a fire and the size of the opening. How easy is it to exit? How are the doors designed?
It's actually very true, you know,
Yeah.
when you bring in that aspect. I know not every single parent goes to school and says, I want to check out the classrooms, you know, the dormitories. There are very few parents that do that. But you bring in the aspect of, you know, they have to check out how many exits, one exists,
Yeah.
and also what else, existence of fire extinguishers, for
Yes,
example.
yes.
Is that something that
Yes,
they
now,
should also consider?
let me get a bit into detail on
Yeah.
what we need to have in place. Looking at fires,
Yeah.
the first thing is you must prevent the fire.
True.
But in the event of a fire, there must be almost instant alert. And then there must be easy exit.
Yes.
So the aspect of prevention is achieved, first of all, in proper design and supervision and construction. So here is where you have the right team to design and supervise and put up the building. But then once the building is in place, it has certain systems. One system is detection. Many buildings do not have fire detection. Fire detection is designed in a way, it's a system, active system. It's designed in a way that in the event of even smoke in any corner, alarms will go off because all fires start with smoke.
True.
And sensitive systems will alarm at that very instant. So people will have time to exit. And in some cases, especially when people are sleeping, people have died not because of fire, but because of the smoke itself. So there are systems that detect smoke before the fire itself, the flames and so on are out, and they will alert people and they will exit. Then we have firefighting. Firefighting, you're going to have the simplest is extinguishers, the portable ones. But we can have a water-based system, we can have other kinds of systems. So they should be in place, they should be visible. Yeah.
Great. As we conclude this conversation, just to pick your very final remarks on how then do we work together, all of us as the different stakeholders, to see that we avoid a recurrence of the same.
Okay. I think, first of all, I would recommend measures in the short term, medium term, and long term. In the short term, I would call for a conversation by the different players to come up with what we consider to be, for example, for the institution of schools, what we consider to be the must-haves. We must have that conversation and we come up with the must-haves. They can be in the form of a detailed document and then a checklist, which then should be distributed to the school owners to self-check themselves, and then school inspections should implement that by going out and seeing that it's in place. And then the schools should invite professionals to inspect and give them recommendations for for fire safety. And then as a country, they should come up with these standards that should then serve in the long term.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nelson Mkwaya, who's an electrical engineer, speaking to us on the latest school fires that we've witnessed in the country. Thank you as well for being part of this conversation. And you can send us your comments on what you think needs to be done to ensure that we don't have the same in the future, you know, because we take our children to school, so we need to know that they're safe once we leave them there. So send us your comments on our social media platforms and we'll be right there to interact with you. We'll take a short break, and NTV Weekend Edition will return with sports.